Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Matt Emmorey. Matt is a Christian. He's the author of a book called Where the Rubber Meets the Road. He's the host of a new podcast. It's called the Authority Figures Podcast. Yeah, look at that beautiful book. But he's the host of the Authority Figures podcast. Gosh, I cannot talk today. This is a part of the Self-Publishing School podcast family, a brand new podcast that he just launched. We'll talk about it a little bit later. He's also one of our resource specialists at SPS. So check this out. Matt has talked with 30,000 calls, over 30,000 calls. We know down to today, we can track to exactly 4,657 aspiring authors on their journey to writing a book. Matt says that number is probably closer to 9,000 or 9,000 plus, but we know for a fact that we can track it down to that. So today we're going to be talking about his journey as an author, the Authority Figures podcast, but also, and I think what would be really relevant for everyone watching this on the YouTube channel or listening on the podcast is there's a lot of conversations with aspiring authors. So what does he learn from those conversations, and how can that help you in your journey to publishing a great book that sells well? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Matt, great to have you here.
Great to be here. Yeah, this is going to be great. Fun.
Yeah. So first off, your book, Where the Rubber Meets the Road, which I've told you this, I cannot say that. I can't even say that phrase anymore without thinking about your book, and maybe the listeners and viewers will feel the same way after this episode. Why did you decide to write that book?
Well, to answer that, I feel like I had to go back to when I was like 14 or 13. I feel like I've always wanted to write a book. It's the most like long-standing dream to be an author. This book was the most accessible book, and it was almost the book that I had to write to get out from underneath the story that I seem to be telling myself about how events unfolded. Like, by all rights, living in this van right here on the cover for a year was a total failure, and it sort of ended with a breakup and lost a job. I'm moving back in with family. I just got scammed out of a bunch of money. Like, you'll read about it in the book. But writing the book, it was demanded to be able to take the story back and have it count for something that was a success. Now I look back on it like it was a huge win. Don't know how that happened.
Wow. So I what the takeaway I'm hearing for people is, what are the stories that you maybe want to reclaim for yourself? That maybe, gosh, just got the chills just thinking about that maybe you look back on in your life and you'd say, I'd look at that as a failure, but in reimagining it and in creating something that helps others, you can actually create something that's a success and something that you look back on as a success.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wrote it kind of as like a manual to myself. There's 15 different things in there that I wrote about to help people that might go through the same stuff. And sure, it's packaged in that way, but I thought, okay, if ever I'm slipping up, if things are not going my way, go back, read this book, remind yourself of all the things that you struggled with, that you were at least aware enough to put in this book. So it's a manual as much as it is a self-help book and an adventure story and a love story.
Yeah. Wow.
It was wild.
So have you ever gone back and reread it?
Yeah, I have.
Cool. Now, what I'm curious about this, knowing what you know now, because obviously you wrote this book and published it in 2019. You've been at SPS for a couple of years now. Gosh, maybe more than that, maybe a few years now. But knowing what you know now, how would you go back and do that book differently?
Interesting. There were a lot of things that I just completely left out. It's not like this was ever going to be a one and done thing. Like, I loved writing this book. I knew there was going to be more. In fact, toward the end, after I was publishing it, too early, I was already thinking about what's the next one going to be.
Yeah.
I was sort of naively thinking that Amazon was going to send me a list of all the people that were buying my book.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, email list. Well, Amazon's got that covered for me. They're going to send it over. And, months went by. The first couple months, there's like 700 people that bought the book. And I did nothing in the book to be able to get to know these people or to continue a conversation with these people. Or to even really encourage them to write reviews on the book. It's very much, I needed my coach and I needed the guidance to be able to get it done, but it was pretty narrow-minded in thinking that it was just, okay, a book is just a book. It's not a tool for me to grow anything, to build anything. Even though in my mind I had this much grander vision on where I wanted my author career to go, I just missed out on lots of opportunities to uh, make it viral, make it connected to what I was building.
And would you say, because this is it's funny, it's probably a conversation you have with people a lot, and we'll get into that stuff later, but it's kind of like this intersection of memoir and self-help that is just it's really a spectrum. And it can be on any number of the spectrum. Where would you say this book is on that spectrum? How did you decide on that? And any lessons that were kind of learned in that process that might be helpful for people who are thinking about writing a book kind of in that same spectrum?
Yeah, man. When I was outlining this book, I lived in the van. It was starting to get really hot in Texas, and so I was like, I need to book some sort of house to get on my feet and to not have the van be like 100 degrees when I'm trying to go to bed, because it was. It was late May. Then right around my birthday, June 2nd, I was going to move into this apartment furnished for June. And I paid a bunch of money to live in this apartment. And it turned out that it was a scam. And I basically lost all of the money that I had been saving. And so I was like, call mom. Hey mom, listen what happened. One of my friends pointed out that, Matt, every time stuff goes wrong in your life, you just call crying to your mommy. Anyway, I ended up back at my parents' house, and there was like a lot of difficulty for the next month and a half as I was trying to figure out how did I end up here? And I was listening to a Brene Brown book and several other books. And funny, at one point in my book, I wrote that I was screaming into a pillow because I was just really distressed at this time. My editor actually edited that part out of the book. I wonder if she was like, that's too pathetic. That's too sad. We're gonna get rid of that. And it was painful. But all of these things, as I was listening to these books and reflecting, were glaring. There's you can no longer ignore the fact that you are sort of this reckless optimist, and hope is your strategy a lot of the time. You can't ignore that expectations versus reality was this thing that you went in with these huge expectations, and you have been in a lot of other areas in your life and are continuously being disappointed by the outcome. I want much more to be able to go into things sort of from a state of non-attachment and then just enjoy whatever is sent my way. And so as I was feeling these lessons, and I was doing my mind map, they were just there. And it seemed like I'd go for a walk and I'd be thinking about, how strong the word should, how strongly the word should had shaped me as a human being. People being like, you should do this, you should do that. And I had these voices in my head, something's got to give, because I cannot go back to the life that I was living before living in this van, I really couldn't go back to the man that I was in the van, because clearly my decisions were leading me back to living at my parents' house. And like, that was not where I wanted to end up ever. So it's 50-50, I'd say. I don't know. I always love telling stories, you know.
Yeah.
I think people listening will figure that out. But maybe it's 70-30 storytelling to self-help.
Okay. And how did you land on that mix, and any advice for people who are navigating that, especially if you're saying, hey, I'm speaking out of a place of like, I don't feel like I'm an expert, and I'm sharing my story, but with some like what I would do differently, as well as lessons learned from that. Like,
Yeah,
how did you land on that mix? Any advice for people who are in that same vein?
sure. Well, nobody is ever going to stand up in your life who is like the authority figure and say, okay, Chandler, you now have permission to share your experiences. You are now accredited, you're knighted, and okay, now your experience is valid. But I was feeling like I was waiting for that in a big way. Uh, like, yeah, I'm not an expert. I don't have a degree, whatever. Like, so the only thing I really have to go on is my own experience. And so I wrote this book wanting to help people, wanting to guide people and coach people, but knowing that it's not like I'm going to turn back to saying, hey, I got this really great degree from Harvard, you know, and that's what I'm standing on. It's just what I went through, what I learned. It happens to be a pretty epic way of learning it. You know, in a crashing and burning type sense, like, hey, I know you guys don't want to crash and burn this epically. You know, so here's how to avoid that. And I thought that was like a worthy way to share some
Yeah,
lessons.
that's awesome, man. That's great. Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement. Let's switch gears a little bit. So you've talked to, you've called 30,000 people. You've had 4,657 plus conversations with aspiring authors that we can track. We know that number is probably closer to or above 9,000 people who have came to self-publishing school, came to selfpublishing.com, came to one of our resources and said, hey, I'm interested in this. And then you give them a ring and you say, hey, let's put a plan together. Right. And that's, I mean, I think it's a really unique journey, and how many people can say that they've talked to 4,000, whatever the number is, 4,657 at a minimum. Like, how many people can say that they've talked to that many people with a common goal to be one thing, which in this case is writing and publishing a book, right? It's unbelievable and kind of just mind-boggling to think about. But I wanted to distill from those conversations, like let's sift, if you will. We're digging for gold here. What would, I guess, first question would be, what do you feel like is the number one challenge that most aspiring authors face that keep them or is keeping them from writing and publishing their book?
Yeah. Above all else, I think the thing I hear most often is it's going to take so long because that people don't have a process, and that shows up in a variety of ways. Like a woman the other day said, I don't have enough life left to write a book. I've been working on this thing for 10 years and I have one chapter. And this woman was like maybe in her 60s, and and that sort of shows up in a variety of ways. I watched an interview of my favorite author when I was writing my fantasy novel, and he's like, oh yeah, I've been working on this for 15 years, you know? And at that point, I was 8 years in, to trying to work on this book, I thought, okay, I'm right on track. I'm doing great. Another 7 years, I'll get it done. And then when I started working with my coach and I actually had a recipe, it unfolded in literally 81 days. So I think that's the thing. People think it's this massive undertaking. It's going to be 50,000 steps when they're running back and forth and they're exhausting themselves doing really the wrong things. If you just knew for a fact every day that you were doing the right thing and you could dive into that right thing, you're going to be more passionate about it. You're going to be more committed to it. And your book's going to turn out a lot better because you know for a fact this is getting you closer. So the short answer, they don't have a process.
Got it. So they're swinging a dull axe. As Abraham Lincoln said, if you give me eight, I think it's 8 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first 5 sharpening the axe, right? Mm-hmm. So they're swinging a dull axe, or I feel like another metaphor that comes to mind is swimming. And I swim like a caveman with clubs. And then I look over and I see someone just effortlessly gliding through the water. And I feel like that's a lot of people's journey as an aspiring author, is maximum effort and minimum forward progress, because like you said, there's a process to follow. So what do you see keeps people from getting started? The biggest thing that's like, oh, I know I want to do this. This is a big dream of mine, but not now, timing's not right, whatever. What's that thing that you see most often that keeps you from getting started?
Yeah. Doubt, and doubt shows up in a variety of ways. I'll give you an analogy. I think writing a book is like a hurdles race, and people have a pretty good idea on what are some of the obstacles that they're going to need to get over. Some of these people will then try to hurdle all of the obstacles at the very beginning. It's kind of like, I think Zig Ziglar says, if you wait until all the lights turn green, you'll never leave the house on your way to the top, whatever. It's something like that. They're like, I'm not confident in my abilities. I have some doubt in myself or this information that I'm going to share. The quality or like the impact that this book is going to have, they doubt. And so, well, if I just figure it all out from the beginning and I get all the obstacles out of the way, and then they don't ever build any momentum, they never even get off the starting line, because it's pretty insurmountable when you try to approach it like that.
Yeah. You're standing at the bottom, staring all the way to the top, saying, how the heck am I going to get there? The bottom of the mountain, right. That is. Well, that's really, really helpful. And guys, if you, I'll talk about this later, but if you want to book a call with Matt, he'd love to add another aspiring author to that tally and help more people on their journey to writing a book. Go to self-publishingschool.com/authority figures. Okay, that's where you can book a call to chat with Matt directly about your book. This will be in the show notes on the YouTube version or in the podcast. It's self-publishingschool.com/authority figures. If you resonated with anything that's Matt said so far, or maybe even some of those reasons why you haven't started yet, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's me, you need to chat with Matt and let's help you get started. So I want to kind of fast forward a little bit and look to people who are successful, and you see, all right, no, they get started, they have success. Is there a common trait or traits that you've seen with successful authors that you've talked to? And this could either be on your one-on-one conversations, or this could even be on the Authority Figures podcast.
Yeah. So you have a great line that I think speaks to this a little bit. You say, new businesses die more often of indigestion than starvation. Most of us, I love that quote, most of us come into this process with so many ideas of how it's going to go, how we're going to approach it. And the person that can recognize that there's someone that knows better than they do, because that person, say, lives in this industry and breathes this industry, and set aside all of the ideas that you have. They could be great, but be willing to adopt the ideas of somebody else. I see those people just like cruising to the finish line, being almost surprised, like, oh. And it does not diminish the accomplishment whatsoever for those people when they get to the finish line, even though at some point they're like, I got to figure it out for myself for it to count. And then those people that are not figuring it out for themselves, they're getting help, or at the end, they're like, oh, this feels just as good as if I were to, figure it out for myself. I still did it. So I think the coachability,
Okay.
and the willingness to set aside their own ideas.
So coachability, it sounds like non-attachment to the outcome and to the you said it, set aside their own ideas. Anything else that you've seen as common traits of people? And this is maybe on the even on the Authority Figures podcast side of things, where you're like, oh, there's one or two things that I've seen that they are more likely to do the thing, and when you talk to them again, they've published the book. They've any of that.
Yes. Thank you for asking that again. Someone joked in Authority Figures, like, this is just quotes with Matt. That's what this show should be called, quotes with Matt. But C.S. Lewis has a really good way of saying this, and a lot of things. He's great. He says, if you aim at heaven, you'll get earth thrown in. But if you aim at earth, you'll end up with neither. So the people that show up and they say, I'm going to write a book and make money. Great. Okay. But go a little deeper until you get like closer to your heart, out of your wallet and into your heart. Because when you do that, then you realize maybe it's not so much about making money. Maybe it's about, on a deep level, being able to have the freedom to spend more time with your children because your parents weren't, as attentive or present as you want to be as a parent. You want to correct that. And suddenly, as you're writing your book, you're not thinking about money. You're thinking about spending time with the kids. Something that is a much more efficient fuel source than something like Earth. Aiming at heaven is always going to get people a better result.
That's great, man. I think it's cool how you get to talk to people at both ends of their journey, right? Which is the very starting point, and you're one of the first people that people talk to. And maybe even for some people, I feel like for probably at least hundreds of those thousands of people that you've talked to, you're probably the first person that they've ever even talked about this book idea to, which is really cool. And then Full Circle Authority Figures podcast, they've done it. And I don't want to say it's at the end of the journey thing, because I think for a lot of those folks, they'd say, oh, a book is the key that opens this door to Narnia, right? Like it's this magical world that I've got a lot that's going to come from this, but it feels like a full circle moment to then refuel and go back out there, which I think is a really cool thing. So I've got one final, sorry, good.
I said for sure.
So final question on just kind of what lessons learned from these calls. And then I want to touch on the Authority Figures podcast. So knowing what you know now from kind of doing all these calls, what would be your advice for aspiring authors? Now, and this is like from the I'm gonna circle back to this at the end. I'm gonna say from your own personal experience, like doing your own book, what would your advice be? But for this one, I want to say, knowing what you know now from all these calls, like what would be your advice to those folks?
So don't try to make your book perfect. I love that John Maxwell at Author Advantage Live said, I was working on my 8th book. I called up my agent and I said, I think I'm starting to figure out this writing thing, which means he had 7 books where he was pretty much like, am I doing it right? I'm writing books. We obsess over the perfection of our books so much that on one hand, you're going to end up toiling on a book that should have been published 5 years ago. And you learned 5 years of additional things that could have been in a couple of additional books. 90%, 80% is a pretty good percentage to then say, all right, any time and energy put into this book beyond this point to make it 81% is just illogical. It's going to take way too much time to make incremental growth. So be okay with it not being absolutely perfect. There's going to be like nuggets in your book, even if they're not articulated in the most, beautiful artistic way that people get. So publish it and make room for yourself in your future, in your present, to be able to continuously be writing more books.
That's great. Love that. So let's talk about the Authority Figures podcast. So guys, if you haven't already, go to the Authority Figures podcast and subscribe. You can just search Authority Figures on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever, pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. Search it, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll have links in the show notes with all this stuff. But what is it and why is it? What's the podcast? Why did you decide to start it?
Yeah. So I am extremely spoiled in that I've had 4,000 something conversations with people. And a book is something that you write about the stuff you're most passionate about. So basically my day is spent talking to people about the stuff that they love, for the most part. And so I wanted to like share some of those conversations. They're so interesting. And these people are doing well, in these 4,500 conversations, they don't get dry. Like somehow none of them are the same.
Yeah.
Everybody has their idiosyncrasies. So I wanted to share some of that. It's also really cool to see people, at the very beginning saying, I really want to do this. And then watching them use a book to build a $1 million business in the last couple of years. Like to see somebody just like building this whole funnel, and it's propelled by the book. It's incredible how much you can do with a book. And I think that that's a bit of what the Authority Figures podcast is about. Just showing how much you can transform your life with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like my life is a testament to that. Prior to publishing my book, I really felt like, I was wandering in the woods and I came up to this wall, and that was the wall of my potential. Like, I'm 28 and here I am reaching as far as I'll ever reach, because I've been trying to write the book for 15 years, unsuccessfully. Like I can do a lot of stuff, but writing a book is beyond me. It's like finishing that book was watching this wall crumble down, and it's like, well, if I can do this, like, I don't know where the end is.
Yes.
So it's celebrating that. It's like a very palpable evolution that I see in people. And an authority figure, the reason it has that name is because of the word author is in the word authority. I mean, when you write a book on something, you are the authority on that thing.
Yeah.
So it's cool to dive into the stuff that each person has kind of committed their life, or at least a section of their life, to becoming an expert on.
Yeah. The root word of, as you said, the root word of authority is author. You can't spell the word authority without the word author. And a lot of people become an authority by first writing a book, right? Which I think is what the show is all about. Who's it for, and who should go check it out and subscribe?
Yeah. So if you're just flat out like nerd and you just like learning about random things, and you might enjoy having a conversation about travel or about someone's really interesting story about going from public housing to being in the Ivy League. Definitely for you, if you just want to hear cool stories. We interview mediums and business people, and a woman that went from she joked taking the vow of poverty to, at some point later in her career, making over $1 million in a day. Like that's a pretty drastic switch.
That's crazy.
And so if you just like cool stories, come. If you also want to learn how to write a book, we definitely dig into their process and what they went through, and some of the habits that they had to put into place to make it happen, some of the processes that they used. So it's
Awesome.
practical, and it's also entertaining.
Cool. Love it. Guys, go check out the Authority Figures podcast, subscribe. I'm going to say this. If you go and subscribe to the podcast, and you can leave a review as a bonus, I'm going to give you a free physical copy of the book, my newest book published. Okay. So this is, go subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you go subscribe, I'll give you a free physical copy. You don't have to pay shipping and handling anywhere in the US. Okay. And all you have to do is go to publishedbook.com/free to get that. Or you can just reach out to the team, but that's the URL. Honor system. So subscribe and then go claim a free copy of the book. Lightning round as we finish here, Matt. Know what you know now. from your own personal author experience, what would be your parting piece of advice for the Matt from a few years ago, or all the other Matts out there who are thinking about writing their first book, maybe memoir, self-help, any topic?
Yeah. Life could be really easy, almost effortless, if you have the right people in your corner, like showing you what to do. There's a lot of toiling and spinning and efforting that happens because we're guessing. And it does not diminish the accomplishment whatsoever to get help.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, speaking of getting help, for people who are like, hey, this has been really interesting and great, I've learned something, Matt's interesting, I'd love to talk with him and see how I can put together a plan for my book, and then also see whether or not it makes sense to work with us at Self-Publishing School. Who should book that call, and what can they expect when they do?
Yeah. If you're serious about writing a book, it's something that you really want to do, maybe in the next few months, this year, definitely book a call. I love talking to people who are like bought into their ideas and they're excited about it, and like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. That's not mandatory, but if you just are serious about making progress on your book, and you're at any point, you don't need to wait until you're ready to publish. You have an idea, you want to write a book. Let's talk at the very, very beginning.
Yes.
I know that the first steps are moving in the direction that you want to go.
Yeah.
Back to the kind of the hurdles analogy, the way that I think of the call with me is there's something that's driving you to listen to this episode. There's something that maybe had driven you to, Google something or to Self-Publishing School's website. That something is that hurdle that's like right in front of you. It's there. You might not exactly know it by name, but you know that there's an obstacle in front of you. I'll help you get over that obstacle. Maybe that's with some resources or some recommendations or talking through your idea. I'll help you get some momentum. And then and I know that there's a corner in this hurdles race, and then there's another line of hurdles. I'll try to provide some things for you then, so that you don't lose momentum on those future obstacles either.
That's such a great analogy. And when's the best time to book a call? When in the process? It's now, right? And whether you're at and because either you're rounding the corner, you're over your second hurdle, or you're at the starting line thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Or you just ran the race and you're like, I don't like my time. I'd love to sell more copies of this book. Either way, this conversation will be helpful. So final things as we wrap, if you want to book a call with Matt, go to self-publishingSchool.com/authority figures. That'll go directly to book a call with Matt. So self-publishingschool.com/authority figures. And then lastly, if you want to grab a copy of Matt's book, Where the Rubber Meets the Road, then you can grab that on Amazon, and new book coming soon. So stay tuned. Maybe when you chat with Matt, maybe he'll tell you about it, or you can check out his Amazon page. It's coming soon. So you can check out the book, Where the Rubber Meets the Road, or book a call with Matt to chat about your book. Matt, you're the man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Always.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.